Grandiflora rose called Solitude, and because it's grandiflora, it's a lot taller than most hybrid teas are. And the purpose of pruning here is we're going to cut it down a third to a half of last year's growth. So we will start using my method by taking the top off. And the purpose of doing this is usually if you've got more leaves, it's much easier to see what's inside when all the stuff is taken off the top. And since you're going to be cutting this off anyway, take it off ahead of time. And you can see we have some new growth on here already, and it's all coming off. And I don't know whether you noticed, but you can see some dead blooms on here. If you allow the last bloom to go to seed, or basically go to hips, you will help your rose go dormant. And particularly if you live in an area that doesn't have frost. Remember, the plant's purpose is to set seed, and if you keep cutting the top off, it doesn't have a chance. So if you leave the top on for the last bloom, then it will help it go dormant. Okay, we've taken the top off. The next part we do with this rose is we're going to take out any dead or diseased canes. If they're little ones, we'll take them all out later, but there's I don't see any dead ones here. Let's take a look over here. Okay. No dead ones, but I'm going to start taking out crossing wood and wood that I know needs to be removed. Like if you have old woody canes and you've got younger canes, you save the younger canes and take out the older canes. They're very sharp. This cane here is old, and it's not growing very strong branches, so it's kind of done its thing, and I'm going to take it out right down here at the bottom. Because we're in a rose garden that the roses are very close together, we tend to prune our roses more horizontal than the way you normally would. So I'm taking this one out too. Because I'm going to save this one. Now I'm going to take out anything that's crossing. I'm going to take that whole cane out, I think. Let me see here. And remember, when you're pruning roses, if you're not sure, you can always leave it and come back later. Once you cut it off, you can't glue it back on. So we're opening this rose up. Come on, baby. Okay, so you can see I've already taken out a lot. So now I'm going to go to thinning the crossing branches, which I can use a smaller clipper for. And remember, with your smaller clippers, remember the science: the longer the handle, the more leverage you have. So we have a crossing cane here. I'm taking it out. Now it's possible that I'll come back later and maybe remove a whole piece that I've taken the canes out, but this is the area where you don't make any decisions yet. So we're trying to make it as simple as possible. So if it's dead, disease, crossing canes, take them out. No decision necessary. This one's crossing. The reason why you don't want the canes to be crossing, because they are thorny, and if they scratch one another, you're likely to get an entrance for disease and insects. And the idea is to open up the plant so that it doesn't get so thick and it gets good air circulation. You take off anything that's less than a quarter to a half inch thick. The science tells you, if you think of the structure of a tree or a shrub, a woody shrub, this rose is going to bloom on the new wood that grows from the cuts that we make. So every branch that comes out of a branch is going to be smaller than the one that it's on, and you will get to where the branches are so thin that they can't take the weight of the rose blossom. Of course, that's not what you want. So we're going to, let's see, this one here. And what you can do if you're not so sure is you can do one section of the rose at a time, kind of divide it up into quarters, and finish one quarter, and then go back and finish the next one, and then the next one. And then you might make some final decisions which may take out some of those canes, but right now we're not dealing with that. So all these little thin canes all come out. You cut them as close to the branch as you can. Don't leave a stub, but remember about the branch bark collar. This relates to roses too. They have that little area where they meet the cane, where the healing mechanism is, or the closing mechanism. It's not really healing, but closing. Here's another crossing cane. This one is a nice strong cane, but I don't like the growth at the top, so I'll cut it back in a minute and we can see if we can get some stronger growth coming lower on the branch this year. Meanwhile, we're going to take out this one because it's crossing that one. We take out the ones that are going into the shrub. We don't want the growth going in, we want it going out as much as possible, recognizing that, as I said here, because we have the roses so close together, we tend to have them more vertical than you normally would with just a rose in the garden. The idea is to end up with as much of a vase shape as you can get, to get lots of light through. These are thin. Actually, when you look at this one here, this is what I mean by, this is an old cane, it's worn out. You see how thin this new growth is? And obviously we tried to rejuvenate it last year and it didn't work. So we're going to take that whole one out because this growth is way too thin, and these are pretty hefty blossoms, so we'll take it out. There's nothing worse than a sticky tool. It doesn't open and close it. What you try to avoid, tearing it like that. Okay. So we're getting close to finishing this side of the cane, this cane here. And we're going to cut to an outside bud. And there's a bud right there. You cut at a 45-degree angle with the high point of the angle above the bud. And you don't cut the angle so deep that it cuts into the cane behind the bud. So you've got to be a little bit above the bud to avoid that. Because we've got a lot of space here, I'm going to save this one. Well, no, it's kind of thin. I think I will. I have to find a bud in the direction I want the growth to go. Remember, the bud, the direction of the bud dictates where the growth is going to come. This one we're going to cut down to here. Okay. I'm going to deal with this one. This cane is too thin. Cut this one to here. Bud is here, outside bud, into an outside bud. This is why under normal circumstances you should never grow roses like this, because they're a pain. You'll have plenty of space between them, which also means that they're less likely to get diseases, or they won't catch them from each other. Here's a nice bud here. We'll cut it to that bud. We don't want this one here or this one here because they're going to grow out into these. I'm going to leave this cane for one more year, and if I think it looks like it's going to cross too badly, I'm going to come back and cut it off later. Right now I'm going to leave it. Find a bud. Yes, there we go. This one. I'm having the bud come out here because I've got a hole. Now the ideal is that you end up with 3 to 5 canes, all going out perfectly, so that you have a lovely vase shape. But frankly, you have to deal with what you've got, and it's very rare that you have that perfect alignment. We have a hole in this cane here, which is probably a borer. Cut it down a little further. Still a borer, and it will either, it may not be alive, it may be an old wound. It's a possibility that will. Now this one I'm taking down to here. It will continue to grow into the plant and it will kill that cane, but we will wait and see. Okay, got 2 more left. This one is a good cane. This top here is dead from a cut made last year, but it's live wood below it. Take that one off. It's too small. This one here to see if we can get a little better one than we got here last year. Take this one off because it's too close. Bud here. We've got one left. And I'm not really happy with any of the growth that came off of this because it's not very heavy, very thick. So I'm going to try cutting it further down the cane. We've got a bud here, and see what we get this year. Okay. This one has a post that the name is coming up the middle, so we wouldn't normally have that kind of obstruction. Okay, now I've got anything small I've got coming out of here. You cut all of that small stuff off, down as far as you can. Sometimes you can't get in there close enough. If you've got a lot of growth, you just have to do the best you can, trying not to leave big stubs. The reason why I'm leaving more canes on this is it's a very robust plant. It blooms profusely. It's fabulous blooms, and it's very healthy. So I'm going to see if we can keep all of these canes. I think we can. If not, I can always remove one later. But for now, I'm going to keep them. So we finished. No, we haven't quite finished. I don't like that one. So pruning a rose doesn't have to be a one-day thing. A lot of times I'll prune a rose and I'll come back the next day and say to myself, why the heck did I leave that piece on? So then I can come back and tidy it up a little bit more, or even take it down a lot more and take out some canes. So you don't have to make the final decision in one go through. Now here where we have so many roses, it's kind of get it done and go because we've got a lot to do. But when you only have a few, you can take your time and decide. But okay, so the interesting thing was, I made it simple. You cut off the top, cut out anything dead and diseased, cut out any crossing canes, cut out anything that's too small, and then you work with what's left over. And the last thing you do is you clean up. Did I bring it with me? Yes. you clean up all of the leaves. And you notice now that I've finished cutting, there are no leaves left on the plant. And if there are old leaves, you take them off. If you're late pruning and you've got new growth coming out, do not take off the new growth, unless you're cutting it out, of course, because it's in the wrong place. But you take off the old leaves. Remember that roses are very susceptible to funguses, and the spores of those funguses are on these leaves, and the rain splashes it right back up onto the plant. So I'm going to remove them all from around it. And this is why you wear these gloves, because when we're going in there and taking them out, because there are places where you can't get anywhere in there except with your hands. So you wear protective gloves like these. These happen to be goatskin palms with hide, cowhide arms. But the goatskin is very good because it's very dense, and most of the thorns can't get through it. Whereas cowhide is much more open textured, and so it can get through. So eventually, these will all be picked up and taken away. And you do not compost them because of the fungus that's lying on the leaves over the winter. And we will, when we're finished with this bed, we will rake it all out and take out all the leaves. We will do only one spray in this garden, and we will do it when one section is completely pruned. We will come in and we will spray with a solution, a combination of a fungicide like Magicop and an oil, horticultural oil. The fungicide is to get the spores that are left. There will be spores left on the canes from last year, and the oil will smother the eggs of any overwintering insects. And during the growing season, we will not spray it here at all. If we get some mildew or some black spot, we'll just pick it off, but we don't spray. So the only time we do spray is once when it's dormant. And I think that's it for now. In rows, you do not prune it at all for the first 2 years. You're going to get the main canes to grow, and you want them to grow as sturdily as possible and tie them or whatever you're going to do. And I will talk later on about apical dominance. We don't need to talk about that now. But what happens is when the rose is growing, if it has apical dominance, it'll only bloom right at the top. So that's why you have to work it over. But actually you can see that the blooming part of the rose is on these side shoots. So what you do, you don't prune the main cane at all, you prune the side shoots and take the ones out that are too thin, like that one. You prune them heavily, you prune them back to 2 buds. And so they look terrible when they're bare. And if the stems are too close together, so it looks like a stick with a bunch of little stubs on it. See that bud there? Stay still. It's too thin. It's too thin. Too thin. Now I'm pulling this down just to show you. Normally I would be on a ladder and I would prune it all in place. And you need to recognize that rose bushes are not actually climbers. They've got nothing to climb with. They have to be tied up. They're just really tall roses with a special method of growing. So that's going to get tied back up. But you can see it's just stubs all the way down. And unfortunately, last year, normally when we do our dormant pruning, the last thing that gets pruned are the climbers. So we had the garden pruned last year and we got shut down before we could prune the climbers. So these climbers are in bad shape because they didn't get winter pruned last year. So they're going to get a heavy pruning this year, assuming that we don't get shut down again and the weather cooperates. But that is how the stem of a climber should look. Okay, so you let it grow for at least a couple of years, so that it gets tall. And the second year it's growing, it'll start to put out these side shoots, assuming that you've controlled the apical dominance, which I will talk about another part of the class. It will start sending out these side shoots, and those are the ones that bloom. So unless you need to rejuvenate the canes, you do not cut the top of the cane off. You only cut off the side shoots that are blooming.